The stage lights burned hotter than the truth in Ezra Callahan's chest. For years, he'd stood under their glare, microphone in hand, preaching hope to millions as the golden voice of Radiant Grace, America's most watched Christian talk show. But tonight, as the crowd's applause faded, Ezra's heart pounded with a secret that could shatter everything. He was in love with a man. At 28, Ezra had built an empire on faith. His deep brown eyes and easy charisma drew viewers from every corner of the country. Housewives in Ohio, truckers in Nevada, retirees in Florida. Raised in a small Georgia town, he'd learned early to wear conviction like armor, quoting scripture to shield himself from the whispers of his own heart. But then came Julian Navarro, a 27-year-old graphic designer with a sharp wit and a smile that unraveled Ezra's carefully constructed world. Started 6 months ago in Seattle, where Radiant Grace was filmed. Julian had been hired to redesign the show's branding, his portfolio bursting with bold colors and daring lines. Ezra noticed him first in a meeting, sketching in a notebook, his curly blonde hair falling over his glasses. There was something unguarded about Julian, a quiet rebellion against the polished world Ezra inhabited. Their first conversation, over lukewarm coffee in the studio break room, sparked a warmth Ezra hadn't known he could feel. "You ever wonder what it's like to just be yourself?" Julian had asked, his green eyes searching Ezra's face. Ezra laughed it off, but the question lingered. That night, he lay awake in his Capitol Hill apartment, the city's hum seeping through the window. He thought of Julian's hands, stained with ink, and the way they'd brushed against his when passing the coffee. For the first time in years, Ezra didn't pray for strength. He prayed for courage. Their connection grew in stolen moments, lunch breaks in Pike Place Market, late-night texts about art and music, a shared laugh over a street performer's terrible juggling. Julian, raised in a secular Filipino-American family in Portland, didn't carry the weight of Ezra's world. He spoke freely, loved openly, and challenged Ezra to question the rules he'd lived by. "You don't have to hide," Julian said one evening, as they walked along the Puget Sound, the water reflecting the city's lights. "Not with me." But hiding was all Ezra knew. His producer, Margaret Voss, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, ran Radiant Grace like a military operation. She'd built Ezra into a brand, clean-cut, devout, untouchable. "The world needs your light," she'd say, her voice warm but edged with control. Ezra trusted her. She'd been with him since the show's start, guiding him through scandals and skeptics. But she didn't know about Julian. No one did. Until Caleb Reed walked into Ezra's life. Caleb, 30, was the show's new assistant director, hired for his knack for crafting viral moments. With his tailored suits and disarming Texas drawl, he blended charm and ambition in a way that put everyone at ease. He was also fiercely loyal to the show's mission, often quoting scripture with a fervor that rivaled Ezra's. "We're doing God's work," Caleb would say, clapping Ezra on the shoulder. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of calculation, that Ezra couldn't quite read. One rainy afternoon, Ezra and Julian met at a small cafe in Fremont. They sat in a corner booth, knees brushing under the table, talking about everything and nothing. Ezra felt alive, untethered from the script of his life. As they left, Julian slipped his hand into Ezra's, a quiet act of defiance against the world. Ezra froze, heart racing, but didn't pull away. For a moment, he let himself believe they could be free. Then he saw Caleb across the street, watching. Panic surged through Ezra. Caleb's expression was unreadable, but his presence felt like a spotlight on Ezra's secret. "I have to go," Ezra muttered, pulling his hand from Julian's. He didn't look back as he hurried away, the rain soaking his jacket. Julian called after him, but Ezra's fear drowned out the sound. That night, Caleb knocked on Ezra's apartment door. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Ezra let him in, dread pooling in his stomach. Caleb paced the living room, his usual charm replaced by something colder. "I saw you today," he said. "With him." Ezra's throat tightened. "It's not what you think." "Don't lie to me," Caleb snapped. "You're the face of radiant grace. You think people will keep watching if they know you're—" He stopped, as if the word itself was a sin. "Margaret needs to know." "No," Ezra said, his voice breaking. "Please, Caleb. I'll handle it." Caleb studied him, then softened. "I'm on your side, Ezra. But you need to be careful. This could ruin everything." Ezra nodded, relief mixing with shame. He promised himself he'd pull back, keep Julian at a distance. But the next day, when Julian texted a simple "You okay?" Ezra's resolve crumbled. He couldn't let go. Not yet. Weeks passed and the tension grew. Ezra and Julian stole moments when they could, but Caleb's watchful eyes seemed everywhere. Margaret began to notice Ezra's distraction, her questions sharp and probing. "You're not yourself," she said one day, her gaze piercing. "Is something wrong?" Ezra lied, but the weight of it crushed him. He was living two lives, one for the cameras, one for Julian, and the strain was tearing him apart. He began to notice small things. A missed call from an unknown number, a cryptic email about protecting the brand. He told himself it was paranoia, but the fear lingered. One evening, Julian showed up at Ezra's apartment unannounced, his face pale. "Someone sent me this," he said, holding out his phone. It was a photo of them together at the cafe, their hands touching. Below it, a message: "End this or everyone will know." Ezra's blood ran cold. "Who sent this?" "I don't know," Julian said, his voice shaking. "But they know where I live." Ezra pulled Julian into his arms, his mind racing. Someone was watching them, someone close. And as the city lights flickered outside, Ezra realized the greatest threat wasn't the world discovering his truth. It was the betrayer hiding in plain sight. Ezra couldn't sleep. The photo on Julian's phone burned in his mind, a silent accusation that followed him into the early hours. He sat on his couch, staring at the Seattle skyline, wondering who could hate him enough to threaten the one person who made him feel whole. Julian stayed the night, curled up on the couch under a blanket, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the danger they faced. At 27, Julian had always been fearless, but now his green eyes held a flicker of doubt. "We can't let this control us," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. "We figure out who's doing this, and we stop them." Ezra nodded, but his thoughts were a storm. Was it Caleb, with his knowing glances and veiled warnings? Or Margaret, whose loyalty to the show's image was unshakable? Or someone else entirely, lurking in the shadows of his carefully curated life? The next morning, Ezra arrived at the Radiant Grace studio, his smile a practiced mask. The set buzzed with activity, cameras rolling, crew members shouting directions, but Ezra felt like he was drowning. Caleb approached, his expression neutral. "You look tired," he said, handing Ezra a coffee. "Big day today. Margaret wants a segment on redemption. Think you can deliver?" Ezra forced a nod. "Always do." But as he stepped onto the set, the weight of the threat pressed harder. He delivered his lines, preached about forgiveness and grace, but his heart wasn't in it. The audience clapped, oblivious to the fracture in his soul. After the taping, Margaret pulled him aside. "You're off," she said, her voice clipped. "What's going on, Ezra?" "Nothing," he lied, his throat tight. "Just didn't sleep well." She studied him, her eyes narrowing. "Don't let me down. This show is bigger than you." Her words stung, but Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she let on. He spent the rest of the day avoiding Caleb, dodging his questions about the show's upcoming charity gala. But avoidance couldn't erase the truth. Someone close to him was a traitor. That evening, Ezra and Julian met at a quiet bookstore in Ballard, hoping the crowd would shield them. They sat in a corner, surrounded by shelves of worn paperbacks, and devised a plan. "We need to trace the message," Julian said, pulling out his laptop. "It came from a burner email, but maybe there's a digital footprint." Ezra watched Julian work, his fingers flying over the keys. There was something grounding about Julian's determination, a reminder that they were in this together. But as Julian dug deeper, his face darkened. "The email was sent from an IP address linked to the studio," he said. "Someone there sent it." Ezra's stomach dropped. The studio was his second home, a place where he'd poured his heart for years. The thought of betrayal from within was unbearable. Could it be a mistake? He asked, grasping at hope. Julian shook his head. "It's too specific. They knew exactly where we were." The realization hit Ezra like a punch. He thought of Caleb's watchful eyes, Margaret's insistence on control. Even the crew, people he trusted, now felt like strangers. He wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but Julian stopped him. "We need proof," he said. "If we accuse the wrong person, it'll make things worse." They spent the next few days playing a dangerous game. Ezra kept up appearances at the studio, smiling for the cameras while scanning every face for a hint of guilt. Julian worked in secret, tracking the email's origin, cross-referencing schedules and access logs. They met in hidden corners of the city. Parks, diners, a rooftop bar in Belltown. Each moment a mix of fear and fleeting joy. One night, as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Union, Julian reached for Ezra's hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "I'm not going anywhere." Ezra's chest ached. He wanted to promise the same, but the weight of his world, his faith, his career, his family, held him back. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. Julian smiled, soft and sure. "You deserve to be free." But freedom felt like a distant dream. The next morning, Ezra found a note slipped under his apartment door. In stark black ink it read, "Stop hiding or the world will see." Attached was another photo, this time of him and Julian on the rooftop, their silhouettes framed against the city lights. Ezra's hands shook as he showed Julian the note. "They're getting closer," Julian said, his voice tight. "We need to act fast." They doubled their efforts, but the studio was a maze of secrets. Caleb began hovering more, offering unsolicited advice about protecting the brand. Margaret grew colder, her comments laced with suspicion. Even the crew seemed to whisper when Ezra passed by. He felt like a stranger in his own life, every step shadowed by an unseen enemy. Then a breakthrough. Julian traced the IP address to a specific computer in the studio's editing bay, a machine only a few people had access to. "It's either Caleb, Margaret, or someone they've trusted," Julian said. "We need to get into that room." Ezra knew it was risky, but they had no choice. The gala was 2 days away, a high-profile event where Radiant Grace would announce a new charity initiative. It was the perfect stage for their enemy to strike. Ezra agreed to sneak into the editing bay after hours, while Julian kept watch. As the clock ticked closer to the gala, Ezra's fear grew. He wasn't just fighting for his secret, he was fighting for his life, for Julian, for the chance to be whole. But the betrayer was still out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything. The studio was eerily quiet after midnight, the hum of cameras and voices replaced by the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Ezra crept through the halls, his heart pounding as he approached the editing bay. Julian waited outside, his phone ready to warn Ezra if anyone appeared. The plan was simple: access the computer, find evidence, and get out. But nothing about this felt simple. Ezra slipped into the editing bay, the room dim and cluttered with monitors and cables. He powered on the suspect computer, his fingers trembling as he typed. Julian had given him a list of files to check: logs, email drafts, anything that might point to the sender. As the screen flickered to life, Ezra felt exposed, like the walls themselves were watching. He found a folder buried in the system, labeled Archive. Inside were dozens of photos, him and Julian at the cafe, the park, the rooftop. His breath caught as he scrolled through them, each image a violation of their private moments. There were also drafts of emails, written but unsent, with threats mirroring the ones Julian received. The language was cold, precise, almost professional. Then he saw it, a document titled Callahan Contingency. It outlined a plan to manage Ezra's public image if his personal choices were exposed. The words were clinical, but their meaning was clear. Someone had been preparing to ruin him. The document was unsigned, but a metadata tag showed it was last edited by Caleb. Ezra's blood ran cold. Caleb, with his easy smile and scripture quotes, had been plotting against him. But why? Jealousy? Ambition? Or something deeper, rooted in the same fear Ezra had carried for years? He copied the files to a USB drive, his hands shaking, and shut down the computer. As he stepped into the hall, Julian's text buzzed. "Someone's coming." Ezra froze, hearing footsteps echo from the stairwell. He ducked into a storage closet, heart racing, as the footsteps grew closer. Through the crack in the door, he saw Caleb pass by, his face tense, a phone pressed to his ear. "It's handled," Caleb said softly. "He won't see it coming." Ezra waited until the footsteps faded, then slipped out, meeting Julian in the parking lot. "It's Caleb," Ezra whispered, showing him the files. "He's been planning this from the start." Julian's face hardened. "We confront him tomorrow at the gala." Ezra hesitated. The gala was a high-stakes event, packed with donors, media, and the show's biggest supporters. Confronting Caleb there could backfire spectacularly. But Julian was right, they couldn't wait. The betrayer had to be stopped before he could act. The next day, the gala glittered at the top of the Space Needle, Seattle's skyline a dazzling backdrop. Ezra wore a tailored suit, his smile a mask as he mingled with guests. Julian stayed close, posing as a guest, his presence a quiet anchor. Margaret was there, commanding the room with her usual intensity, while Caleb moved through the crowd, shaking hands and laughing like nothing was wrong. Ezra's stomach churned as he watched Caleb. The files burned in his pocket, a ticking bomb. He wanted to believe there was another explanation, that Caleb wasn't the monster the evidence suggested. But as the night wore on, Caleb's glances grew sharper, his smiles tighter. Ezra knew they were running out of time. During a break in the speeches, Ezra pulled Caleb aside, leading him to a quiet corner of the observation deck. "I know what you've been doing," Ezra said, his voice low. "The photos, the threats. I found everything." Caleb's face didn't change, but his eyes flickered. "You're making a mistake," he said. You think I'd risk my career for this? Then explain the files, Ezra said, holding up the USB drive. Your name's on them. Caleb's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Margaret appeared, her expression unreadable. What's going on? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Ezra hesitated, but Julian stepped forward, his voice steady. Caleb's been threatening us, he said. He's got photos, plans to expose Ezra. Margaret's eyes widened, then narrowed. Is this true? She asked Caleb. Caleb laughed, a hollow sound. You're believing him? A nobody designer over me? But Margaret didn't flinch. Show me the evidence, she said to Ezra. Ezra handed her the USB drive, his heart in his throat. As Margaret scrolled through the files on her tablet, her face grew pale. Caleb, she said, her voice cold. You're done. Caleb's charm vanished, replaced by a snarl. You think you can just throw me out? I made this show what it is. Ezra's the one who's been lying, hiding who he is. The words hit Ezra like a blade, but Julian stepped closer, his hand brushing Ezra's. He's not hiding anymore, Julian said, and neither am I. Margaret turned to Ezra, her expression softening. Is this true? She asked. About you and Julian? Ezra's throat closed, but he nodded. Yes, he said, the word a release. I love him. The admission hung in the air, raw and real. Margaret stared at him, then at Julian, and for a moment, Ezra thought she'd turn away. But she sighed, her shoulders slumping. We'll figure this out, she said. But Caleb, you're finished. Caleb stormed off, his threats echoing in the night. Ezra felt a weight lift, but the battle wasn't over. The gala continued, the guests oblivious to the drama. But Ezra knew the truth would spread, and when it did, his world would change forever. The fallout came faster than Ezra expected. By morning, whispers of the gala confrontation had leaked online. Posts buzzed with speculation, some calling Ezra a hypocrite, others praising his courage. Radiant Grace's viewership split, some vowed to stand by him, others demanded his resignation. Ezra sat in his apartment, scrolling through the chaos, each comment a dagger to his heart. Julian sat beside him, his hand on Ezra's knee. You don't have to read this, he said. It's just noise. But Ezra couldn't look away. His phone buzzed with messages from his family in Georgia. His mother's voice trembling with disappointment. His brother's silence louder than words. The faith he'd built his life on felt like a cage now, its bars forged from the expectations of others. He thought of the scripture he'd quoted for years. The truth shall set you free. But freedom felt like falling. Margaret called an emergency meeting at the studio. Ezra arrived, his stomach in knots, to find the team gathered in the conference room. Margaret stood at the head of the table, her face weary but resolute. We're at a crossroads, she said. Ezra, you've been the heart of this show. But this changes things. Ezra braced himself, expecting her to ask for his resignation. But Margaret surprised him. I've spoken to the board, she said. We want to keep you, but we need to address this publicly, and it won't be easy. The room was silent, the crew's faces a mix of shock and uncertainty. Ezra glanced at Julian, who'd insisted on coming, sitting quietly in the corner. His presence gave Ezra the strength to speak. I've spent my life preaching love, he said, his voice steady despite the fear. But I've been hiding from it. I'm done hiding. If that means losing everything, so be it. A murmur rippled through the room, some nodding, others looking away. Margaret nodded slowly. Then we rewrite the narrative, she said. We tell your story, honestly, openly. It's a risk, but it's the only way forward. The plan was bold. A live special where Ezra would address the rumors, share his truth, and face the world. Julian helped craft the visuals, designing a set that felt warm, human, not the sterile stage Ezra was used to. They spent late nights preparing, Ezra wrestling with what to say. "Just speak from here," Julian said, touching Ezra's chest. "That's all they need." But Caleb wasn't done. Days before the special, a new wave of leaks hit. Private emails between Ezra and Julian, stolen from the studio servers. The messages were intimate, vulnerable, and now plastered across tabloids and X threads. Ezra felt violated, his love reduced to headlines. Julian's face paled as he read the comments, some cruel, others sympathetic. "They don't know us," he said, but his voice trembled. Ezra tracked down the source of the leak, expecting Caleb's name. Instead, he found a shock. The emails had been accessed by Margaret's assistant, a quiet woman named Rachel, who'd worked at the studio for years. When confronted, Rachel broke down, admitting Caleb had coerced her, promising her a promotion. "He said it was for the show's good," she sobbed. "I didn't know it would go this far." Ezra's anger flared, but pity tempered it. Rachel was a pawn caught in Caleb's game. Margaret fired her on the spot, but the damage was done. The special loomed, and Ezra knew it was his last chance to take control of his story. The night of the live broadcast, the studio was electric with tension. Ezra stood backstage, Julian at his side, their hands clasped until the final moment. "You've got this," Julian whispered, his eyes fierce with belief. Ezra stepped onto the set, the lights blinding, the audience a sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers. He took a breath and began. "I've spent my life telling you to love without fear," he said, his voice raw. "But I've been afraid. I'm gay. I'm in love. And I'm not ashamed." The words hung in the air, met with gasps, applause, and silence. Ezra told his story, his faith, his fear, his love for Julian. He didn't shy away from the pain, the betrayal, or the hope. "This isn't about losing faith," he said. "It's about finding it. In myself, in love, in truth." When he finished, the studio was quiet, then erupted in applause. Julian rushed to his side, tears in his eyes, and they embraced under the lights, the world watching. For the first time, Ezra felt free. But the victory was bittersweet. The show's ratings plummeted in some markets, sponsors pulled out, and hate mail flooded the studio. Yet others rallied behind Ezra, sharing their own stories of love and struggle. Radiant Grace was at a tipping point, and Ezra knew his time as its host might be ending. Months passed, and Radiant Grace teetered on the edge. Ezra and Margaret fought to keep it alive, rebranding it as a platform for inclusivity and honest faith. Some viewers returned, drawn to Ezra's vulnerability, but others never would. The show's future was uncertain, but Ezra felt a peace he hadn't known before. He and Julian moved into a small house in Queen and a quiet refuge from the storm. They built a life together, cooking dinners, adopting a dog, planting a garden. Julian's art flourished, his designs gracing galleries across Seattle. Ezra began writing a book, a memoir about love, faith, and betrayal, pouring his heart onto the page. Caleb vanished after the gala, his career in ruins. Rumors swirled that he'd moved to Texas, starting over in obscurity. Ezra didn't hate him. He pitied him, a man trapped by his own fears. Margaret stayed on, her loyalty to Ezra unwavering, though she carried the guilt of missing Caleb's betrayal. "You're my family," she told Ezra one day, her voice soft. I should have seen it. Ezra forgave her, knowing trust was a fragile thing. He forgave himself, too, for the years spent hiding. His family in Georgia reached out, tentative but open, and Ezra began rebuilding those bridges, one conversation at a time. One crisp autumn evening, Ezra and Julian walked through Volunteer Park, the same place where they'd first held hands. The air was sharp, the leaves a riot of color. Ezra stopped at a bench, the same one from their early days, and pulled Julian close. I lost everything for you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I'd do it again. Julian smiled, his eyes bright. You didn't lose everything, he said. You found yourself. Ezra kissed him, the world fading away. The bench bore a new carving, added by an anonymous hand. Love dares to rewrite faith. It was their story, etched into the world, a testament to the courage it took to live truthfully. As they walked home, hand in hand, Ezra felt the weight of his past lift. He'd been a preacher, a host, a symbol, but now he was just Ezra, a man in love, free at last. The betrayer had tried to break him, but love had been his salvation. And in that truth, he found a faith deeper than any he'd ever preached.